What's up, patrons? Ben and Chad once again back for the Wednesday live chat. Here we are at our respective homes. You guys know how this works. You've been good enough to show up at the Patreon page and offer up some questions in the comments there. And we're going to spend the next 60 minutes or so answering them. Ben, how you doing?
I tell you, I feel like I went on a wild ride watching the Watchmen last night. Some heavy shit went down, as you know. I don't have to tell you.
Yeah, well, episode 6 is probably the signature episode of the entire season, don't you think?
I mean, I don't really know what signature episode means, but they all seem important. A lot of stuff went down. We were talking about a little bit beforehand, before we started recording, how when you're watching, especially as an MMA fan, you're watching these scenes of a young officer, Will Reeves, cleaning up the streets, just fighting multiple dudes at once. You get a sense that there's a little Boss Rootin' Dangada going on there.
Yeah, he's definitely seen the Boss Rootin' self-defense tapes where Boss teaches you how to fight in a nightclub.
Yeah, he must have gone forward in time, watched that YouTube video of Boss Rootin' banging people's heads together and throwing sneaky little elbows, working in close, working at the distance, using the environment. That's what I like about his tactical approach to those situations.
Man, I would love to go back and review those Boss Rootin' tapes, especially the one where he's teaching you how to fight in a nightclub and he's bouncing the other guy's head off the table and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I believe as he's bouncing the head off the table, he's saying, "Don't you ever do that again." And it's not even clear what that is.
Yeah.
You know, that could be pretty minor.
I mean, that's just fun. That's just good fun watching Boss Rootin' bounce people's heads off of nightclub tables and whatnot.
You know what I really want to know is what was cut out of those videos? Like what was deemed, you know what, this isn't good enough for the final product. Like this is B-roll, this is cutting room floor stuff. But because it seems like he just kind of showed up and riffed. I did not get a sense that there was a really strict shooting script for that one.
Yeah. Now I imagine most stuff they kept.
Yeah.
But I would like to see what ended up on the cutting room floor.
Yeah. All right. You ready to get to it? Ready to get your live chat on?
I'm ready.
Do you want to take a guess at who's first this week?
Well, last week we made an awful big deal about Chris Rudier being on a streak. He'd been pretty hot.
Not just a streak, but his response came so quickly after I posted the initial post that it seemed suspicious. Many people were saying that Chris Rudier had found some way to game the system.
Some kind of black, dark magic was at work. I'm betting that some upstart took that as their cue to come in and snatch the crown off the head of Chris Rudier. I bet we got somebody else claiming the top spot this week.
You would be correct, because it is your dude Cody Burnson just saying first.
Okay, classic.
And then, shortly thereafter, Christopher Rudier replies, "Well played."
Okay.
And so this is what you like to see: is respect among the greats.
Yep. Respect between competitors.
Cody Burnson then follows it up by saying, "Internet USADA finally paid our boy Chris Rudier a visit. Let's just say the events did not play out the way Chris wanted to, and live reporting from the scene say he hightailed it out of there quicker than Vanderlei Silva when he saw an NSAC rep enter his gym. Now to my legally obtained question. With the recent reports of Dustin Poirier and Tony Ferguson looking to throw down on the Khabib-Gaethje card, where does that leave the potentially UFC-bound Michael Chandler if he does indeed cross the aisle? You have Conor out there doing whatever Conor does. For me personally, I think a fight with number 5 Dan Hooker or number 7 Paul Felder would be the way to go here. But let's be real. Michael Chandler against anyone in a top 15 in the UFC would be a real hashtag would watch."
Yeah.
Now, I definitely agree that it's a hashtag would watch situation. Michael Chandler just showing up in the UFC against basically anybody. I think if this ends up being the situation, and Cody Burnson is right that it looks like that's the way things are shaping up, although still a lot of things seem to be we're doing a lot of the verbally agreed to kind of reporting on a lot of these matchmaking situations, and you can see why you would want Poirier and Tony Ferguson on that same card with Khabib versus Gaethje, just because you want to have a backup in case something goes wrong there. if Michael Chandler, I mean, I don't know exactly what the timeline for him showing up, like what this contract situation with Bellator, if there's a matching period or what, like how quickly he could turn around and come in the UFC. But assuming it would be sometime in the next few months, which I don't know if that's even a safe assumption at all. But if that were the situation, I think Dan Hooker sounds like the better idea, just because, Dan Hooker's had a few high profile fights. Stylistically, it seems like it'd be a really fun fight. It also seems like it would be a good first test in the UFC. Like, let's find out where Michael Chandler stacks up right now against some of these UFC people, because it's not like it doesn't feel like we're going out there and trying to find a purposely bad stylistic matchup for him so that we can get him beat up and go, look, Bellator fighters suck and this is the proof. It feels like it would be an interesting fight, a fun fight, a fight where no matter who wins, that guy has proven something and you can do business either way.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too, that Dan Hooker seems like the choice there. And I think if those were our two options, Dan Hooker or Paul Felder, I think the match that got made would probably tell you something about how the UFC felt about Michael Chandler a little bit, because we all love Paul Felder, but I think if you threw Michael Chandler out there into a fight with Paul Felder, it would be a cool stylistic matchup that we would expect to be kind of a banger, but also one that I think we would also expect Michael Chandler to win. Dan Hooker feels like a much more UFC style matchmaking opportunity for Michael Chandler to come in from Bellator and have as his first fight. And you said it right when you said it doesn't feel just like a cheap matchup that the UFC would make to try to start Michael Chandler off with the L. But at the same time, it would be a tough matchup. Like Dan Hooker is a big dude at that weight. He's got good leg kicks. He's got good range. He hits pretty hard. He's a pretty good technician. And the times that we've seen Michael Chandler struggle, the very limited times, I should say, that we've seen Michael Chandler struggle, sometimes it's against dudes who are big and like throw heavy leg kicks and can get around the cage and test him like that. So I think that would be a good fight for Michael Chandler coming in the door, and like a good test for him that would serve as a good barometer for where he would end up standing, at least immediately in the lightweight division. And it also feels like we are vaulting over many carts and horses to get to that situation. So, but I like where your head's at, Cody Burnson. Those are all good options as far as I'm concerned. Wouldn't it be some shit if all that was on the same card and somehow there was some COVID tomfoolery and somehow Michael Chandler did a couple cartwheels and backflipped his way into a title shot? Wouldn't that be some shit?
That would be some shit.
Talking about vaulting over carts and horses.
Yeah, I mean, as long as we're like vaulting over the carts and horses that get Michael Chandler in the UFC and ready to fight in time for that fight card, like that's the only really unrealistic part of that scenario.
Yeah.
The part where some COVID related stuff and maybe other like injury stuff, just plain old MMA stuff, even pre-COVID, we were known to have some crazy shit happen leading up to the fight card. But it is not at all unrealistic to imagine something like that happening. Like that basically any lightweight who gets themselves on that fight card has a decent chance of ending up in the damn title fight main event.
Right. And just because this is how things work, it would be Khabib that got pulled, and it would be Chandler versus Gaethje
for the interim strap.
For the interim strap, just because that's how MMA works sometimes.
Ryan Busatil says, Major League Baseball just had their trade deadline, and it got me thinking about trades in MMA. We had the UFC One Championship trade a couple of years ago with Mighty Mouse traded for Ben Askren. I can't think of another example. But let's fantasize that you two are Dana White and Scotty Coates. First, who is who and why? Then, let's pretend you get along and want to make a mutually beneficial trade. Which Bellator fighter and UFC fighter would be a good trade for both sides? Ben Gabriel replies, Chad invented Dondasso. Absolutely Dana shit. Which is a fair point.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I was going to say I was Scott Coker and you were obviously Dana White, but I guess we'll just move on.
Which one of us likes Angry Birds more?
Yeah. I have no idea. I have no idea how to answer that question. It's tough, I think, to find middle ground that is probably going to benefit both sides.
Yeah.
If you're the UFC and you want somebody from Bellator, I think your mind immediately goes to like the Vadim Nemkovs of the world, the Pitbull brothers, even though Dana doesn't know anything about them, according to that interview we saw with him recently. Of course, Douglas Lima. Douglas Lima might be your top pick if you're the UFC. If we were doing a draft and you got to just like straight jack a guy off the Bellator roster and you're the UFC, Douglas Lima might be the guy. But what's hard is to find an analog, right? For like, who would let's say you were going to trade Douglas Lima and your Bellator, who do you get back? Who could, like, it would have to be a top star in the UFC. And in that case, like, the UFC is probably not going to want to get rid of him.
Yeah, that's the problem with trying to make that calculation between the UFC and Bellator is when it was the UFC and one championship. And for one thing, when we say trade, we need to do the air quotes around trade, because it was more like, okay, you release your guys so you can sign with us, and we'll release our guys so you can sign with you. But that was one where it was like, okay, you have these two guys who are both seen as at or near the top of their divisions, and yet you also both feel like you've come to the end of your usefulness with that guy. Like you've done everything you can do with him. Maybe you're even a little bit frustrated with it. You'd like a fresh face. We think we could do something new with that guy. You think you should do something new with our guy, and therefore it works out for both parties. With the UFC and Bellator, if you're the UFC and you're looking at who you'd like to have off the Bellator roster, you're right that it's either somebody like Vadim Nemkov or something where you're probably hoping like, well, let him play out his Bellator contract, and if he's still a hot item by then we'll get into the free agency conversation, and there's a good chance we could just get him straight up that way. Or are you looking like to the future, like somebody like AJ McKee, and you're like, okay, that seems like a guy that we could do something with. But then if you're the UFC and you're looking at that, even if you think like, okay, that guy seems like he's going to be a real talent and that he could really be something, you're probably also thinking like, you know what? The Contender Series churns out like 4 new guys each week. We sign them to these shitty contracts that they're just so grateful to get. And so what if 90% of them don't pan out? We might get one AJ McKee out of that. And we can just keep doing that, and we get him in like this entry-level deal. And it's a way easier system for us. We don't have to give up any of our guys that Bellator would actually want in order to make that happen. So, I mean, maybe what we're just describing is the real life situation that leads to the complete lack of trades going on in MMA.
Just for argument's sake, what about Douglas Lima for Max Holloway?
Okay. You know what? Yeah, I mean, I can see why the UFC would feel like, all right, Max Holloway's kind of in a weird spot. He's also beloved, though.
Right, and like, that's why if you were Bellator, I think that's why you would want to get him. That's why it makes sense for you if you're Bellator.
Yeah. I don't hate it. I don't hate that idea. That's as good a suggestion as any I can come up with. I'll give you that. Therefore, I guess you really are the. Which one did you want to be?
Scotty Cokes.
No, I don't think so. You're the Dana White.
I mean, it's just
unscrupulous.
It's tough to find guys on the roster. I'm looking at the UFC rankings right now. I mean, it's just tough to find what feels like it would be an equitable trade. Like you could say, you know, what about Vadim Nemkov for Colby Covington or something like that? But like, I don't even know if that would make sense for Bellator.
Yeah.
So
here's one from Kat Pope who says, and you know somebody had to do it, Chad, and so we're doing it now. So about that new free agent, Brock Lesnar, where do you want him to go? BBMF with DC? Reminder for anybody who missed this last time, the BBMF was the idea, the biggest, baddest motherfucker belt. Bellator against Fedor and eventually Frank Mir. See, Kat Pope's looking way down the road here. I like what he's doing. AEW, Ryzen, where he finally accepts the nickname Godzilla and fights Bob Sapp. Cody Burnson replies, inject Brock versus John, meaning John Jones, into my veins now.
Okay.
So first of all,
we have to have a caveat, right?
A big caveat.
In that this would be like season 16 of us discussing where potential free agent Brock Lesnar is going to land, right? Like we've already done multiple 10 episode seasons about what's going to happen with Brock Lesnar. And in the season finale, every single year, he re-signs with WWE. So let's just say that as the caveat before we go any further.
it's kind of like Entourage, and that every episode and season seems to be built around, is this guy's whole film and acting career going to fall apart? And then the resolution by the end is, no, it'll be fine.
Yeah. He's just going to play in a celebrity poker game and everything's going to be fine.
Yeah. Yes. And so that's, and I know this is a weird thing to see it happen each time in the MMA media landscape, because you know that all the people writing about Brock Lesnar free agency stories, they know just as well as we do, Chad, what the history is here and what the most likely scenarios are here and how this has gone and likely will go. So yet they also know that part of the history is that anytime you could put Brock Lesnar's name in a headline, especially about potentially coming back and fighting some MMA anywhere, it's a guaranteed to get you some clicks.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I don't want to say it's like a bad faith thing, but everybody kind of knows, all right, we are mostly just playing like a hypothetical game for fun and clicks right here, but we're going to have to at least like take it seriously enough to get the clicks. We can't be like, this will probably never happen, but how about if Brock Lesnar did come over? Like, everybody has to do their stuff and play their role every time that this thing comes about. And so that should be the caveat that we spread over this entire topic anytime it comes up for discussion, just so we all are very clear about that.
Here's what I will say, though, and I'm doing this with my hands.
Okay. Wait, hold on. Okay.
Just to denote the seriousness of the situation.
All right.
If you're Scotty Cokes and there is an inkling of a chance that you could get Brock Lesnar right now, you got to go to Steven Espinoza and say, if we've got any money hidden anywhere, if we could sell a couple cars or, liquidate some assets just to get a little bit of cash, now is the time to empty the coffers to try to get Brock Lesnar, because you've got Fedor. Now,
yes,
Scott Coker seems to genuinely love Fedor. He seems to wish that he was the son that he never had. If you're Scott Coker, the question would be whether or not you would be okay. Because over there in Bellator right now, Ben, they're talking about, we're going to have this big send-off for Fedor. Like, we're going to we know where it's going to be. This is how it's going to go down. And yet, like, you just look at the landscape of Bellator, and it's not as though, maybe aside from Fabricio Verdum, if you could make it happen, it's not as though there are a bunch of potential opponents for Fedor just like falling out of the sky for you.
Already had him beat up a fat Rampage.
If you could get Brock Lesnar, it's the biggest fight obviously the biggest fight in Bellator history, without question, without even being comparable to anything else you've ever done. It is by leaps and bounds in a different stratosphere than any fight Bellator has ever done before. But
also, no USADA testing pool to have to mess around with, which kind of tripped up the big fella last time.
But you would have to sacrifice your large adult son, Fedor Emelianenko, at the altar of the Dark Lord, Brock Lesnar.
Oh, wait a minute. You don't think...
Since you wanted to be Scotty Cokes a few minutes ago, would you do it?
I mean, you are completely discounting the possibility that maybe Scotty Cokes believes that Fedor could go in there one night and recapture the magic, Chad.
Yeah.
Bouncing around on the toes, hands light, just flinging those murder balls upside Brock Lesnar's big-ass head. We know the guy doesn't like to get punched in the face, Chad. It's not like he's been doing a whole lot of MMA recently.
I mean, that is some magic.
I'm doing this with my hands.
To also denote the seriousness of the situation.
Okay, but also for this hypothetical, are we imagining that he gets Brock Lesnar to like a 3-fight deal, or is it just like a one-off where you come in, we pay you $5 million or something to come in here and fight Fedor on a Bellator pay-per-view or some shit like that? Like, what do you see as being like? When does it stop being worth it to get Brock? Like, do you need to be able to get Brock Lesnar for a few fights? Or if you could just do one, just Brock Lesnar versus Fedor, you pay out a bunch of money, but then it's not like you created a bunch of new Bellator fans if both guys are unavailable on the Bellator roster after that.
Well, I think anything with Brock Lesnar is going to be a one-fight deal, right? Like almost regardless of what it actually says on the piece of paper, every fight, like every deal is probably going to be a one-fight deal. And frankly, don't you think for Bellator, it makes far more sense to be able to ink Brock Lesnar for a one-fight deal than it would for the UFC? Just because, like I said, it would be like kind of like an earth-shattering tectonic shift in the landscape to be able to bring Brock Lesnar in, even for just one fight. And obviously, if you're Bellator, and maybe you could do pay-per-view, like we know they've always wanted to do pay-per-view before, like Scott has wanted to do pay-per-view all the way back to the Strikeforce days and could never manipulate the heavyweight bracket enough to get Alistair Overeem and Fedor into a fight together in order to do a pay-per-view. If you could get Fedor and Brock for one event and do it on pay-per-view, obviously it makes financial sense, I think, for you to try to do it if you're Bellator. And the obvious move would be to stock the rest of the card with Vadim Nemkov, Douglas Lima, AJ McKee, anybody you've got who you think is camera ready and ready to get out in front of people. And I guess you make the gamble that, like, okay, maybe people come in the door for Brock versus Fedor. Maybe they stay for the rest of the fights and they end up, kind of liking some of those guys. And then maybe you've increased Bellator's Q factor in one night and people start making time for Bellator again.
But I don't know. It's not like there's no upside for the UFC and potentially.
No, and like the upside is money. The upside,
yeah. Well, you get Brock Lesnar versus John Jones. Like, if you could put that fight together, I mean, I don't know. See, that's the thing too. Is like if you in the already strained hypothetical that we're talking about, where Brock Lesnar is like, yeah, make me an offer to come do MMA again. Like, now I'm in what? Like, how old is Brock Lesnar? Early to mid 40s at this point.
55.
And to say, like, hey, remember how last time you had a big issue with the USADA thing, and like we'll have to go through all that shit again, and you got to make sure you're off the foot creams. You know what I'm saying? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, Brock Lesnar. So there's already some impediments that he might not like about coming back and doing a fight in the UFC. But if he does say, like, all right, at this point and at this age and this time in my life, here are the kind of fights I would be willing to entertain, and fighting the best fighter walking the planet Earth maybe isn't one of them.
Yeah.
Even if I feel like I'd have a big size advantage over him, I still feel like maybe John Jones is not the one-off fight I want. Like, are there any more Mark Hunts? You got any more of them Mark Hunts? Brock Lesnar might be saying to the UFC. So it's like Bellator, they got some of the Mark Hunts. They got some of those fights for you. The UFC might want you to come in and fight one of the big ones, or like, that might be the kind of shit they could talk Daniel Cormier into coming out of retirement for. Although I don't know if you're dealing with an eye injury, and he seemed pretty rock solid in his most recent statement about retiring. But I don't know. A lot might depend on what kind of work you would be offering Brock Lesnar.
Yeah, I agree with that. And
he's just going to keep being a pro wrestler anyway. So this is a bullshit conversation.
First of all, if you're going to bring Brock Lesnar over and you're the UFC, the first thing you got to do is book that cruise for Francis Ngannou, because it's probably going to be Francis Ngannou who gets left out in the cold. Now,
Francis, you won. You won the cruise, buddy. You don't remember signing up? No, you did. You definitely did. I was with you. You put your name you put your business card in a little fishbowl. You won. 8 weeks, man. All around the globe. Research vessel. You're going to love it. It's going to be great.
Now, I am admittedly not thinking exclusively financially here when I say this, but I almost feel like you got to do the John Jones Stipe Miocic fight if Jones is indeed going up to heavyweight. I think that's the one that you run the risk of screwing up in some way if you leave it for later. And it's also a big marketable fight. Like, it probably isn't a shoot the moon home run that Brock Lesnar versus John Jones is, but it's still a big fight. It's still like a million selling pay-per-view type of fight, just by the virtue of the fact that John Jones is going to fight for the UFC heavyweight title. Same card, if you could do it, what I book is Brock Lesnar versus Daniel Cormier. Because then, assuming you could get Brock for more than one fight, you would have all kinds of fun options, regardless of who won and who lost. Now, if you're Brock Lesnar, Ben, and you're coming into the UFC, and I say, and I'm Dana White, and I say, you can pick any one of these three opponents. Do you pick John Jones, Daniel Cormier, or Francis Ngannou? Because any three of those is a big fight.
You pick Daniel Cormier for sure. If you're Brock Lesnar, you feel like just size-wise, matchup-wise, he's also a fellow old guy. You were also looking at those three names and thinking there's not going to be a huge difference in my cut of the pay-per-view buys if I fight Francis Ngannou over Daniel Cormier. It's, there might be a difference between those three in matchups with Brock Lesnar and how many pay-per-view it sells, but it's not going to be a huge difference. It's not going to be that noticeable and in your bottom line at the end of the day. So you're probably looking at it and being like, who has the least chance to elbow a fucking hole in my head or hit me so hard that I end up regretting this decision for the rest of my life? Yeah. Like sitting around in dark rooms thinking about how I had it pretty good and I should have stopped when I was ahead. Like Daniel Cormier is the guy where you feel like, okay, maybe he looks like another Cain Velasquez in a lot of ways, but it's still probably preferable to the other two guys.
Is it crazy to think that Bellator makes the most sense right now?
I mean, a lot depends on how that conversation you imagine at the very start of this conversation goes, where Scotty Cokes has to go to Steven Espinoza or whoever and be like, what do we have in the safe? Like, don't tell me, like, pull open the floor safe. I've seen it. Pull up that little flap of carpet, punch in the code. Let's see what's in there. And if there's enough in there that they feel like they could spare, there's some reason to think that could be a realistic possibility, but that's only if the major caveat is satisfied, in which Brock Lesnar seriously wants to do MMA at all, or as if he's just, again, using it as leverage to get a better deal out of pro wrestling side of things, which is 95% the case.
See ya at Survivor Series, Brock.
Sam Payne says, can one of you please explain the, quote, you can't tell someone when to retire thing? I always hear it from people around the sport, but I'd never heard it beforehand. Why can't you? I mean, you can't force them to unless you're a licensing body, but why can't you tell them to? It seems like a moral imperative if they are just getting their brain mushed every 6 months. Is this an American maximum freedom thingy? It seems the sport would be a better place if people chorused for some fighters to retire, in parentheses, Diego, etc. To which Neil replies, I was at the show in Norfolk where Matt Brown deaded Diego Sanchez with a elbow, left me feeling sick. Never felt such a genuine concern for the future safety of a fighter before, and was hoping he'd leave his gloves in the cage. Fast forward 3 years and he's gone 3-1 since, thanks in part to Michelle Piera doing the Michelle Piera things, and is talking about fighting 4 more times before hanging it up for good. This can't end well, right? Also, is Diego's faith in his fight/life guru proof of his diminished capacity for rational decision-making? Well, I can tell you, at least on the last one, Diego Sanchez has always been the type of guy who would be totally into a life fight guru, who's like a breathing expert. Like Diego the guy Sanchez who harnessed the storm on The Ultimate Fighter is definitely still the guy who is into the breathing expert guy.
Aside from his stints at Jackson MMA, Diego Sanchez's entire career is him linking up with a person who is probably not the right person. Right?
Well, and even when he was at Jackson, I remember him getting ready for a fight, and like he had some other coach who was there, like kind of like motivational style, like in his ear as he was working out one day. And I asked Greg Jackson, I was like, oh, is that one of your, like, I don't know who that is. Like, is that one of your coaches? And he was like, oh no, Diego always has some weird guy with him. And it was just like, that was just the kind of the piece that they made with it. Like Diego has a fight camp coming up. He's going to have some guy in here who is on a whole different program, and you just got to deal with it. But as to the core question about you can't tell someone when to retire, I mean, I think what we mean when we say that is we've learned over time that it doesn't work to tell someone when to retire. Like, right. And this is one of the things that makes this sport really difficult in this specific aspect more than other sports. Because it's like, if you get to a point where you can't really play in the NFL anymore, teams won't sign you. Like, even if they feel like you're a great guy and the fans love you and it would be nice to have you on a roster, they have very limited roster space as it is. As they like to say in the NHL, there's not room for any passengers on the team. Like, everybody has to be a real contributing member of the team. and they can't keep you around for any other reason. And it's like you get to the point where no NFL team has a roster spot for you. That's kind of it. Maybe you could go try to play. We see it in baseball more, like where people like Ricky Henderson, where he would just like go to an unaffiliated minor league team. Like he just wanted to play that badly. And yet with fighting, it's like the UFC could tell you, hey, we think you should retire. And you could be like, thank you for your opinion. I disagree. Now, either give me another fight as per my contract or let me go. And if they let you go, there's probably some other promoter out there who, even if they feel like you can't fight at that level anymore, you could still sell some tickets, man, or you could still bring some viewers in. Selling tickets, maybe not such a thing anymore. But like somebody, whether it's Bellator or bare knuckle boxing or like some other MMA organization looking to make a splash, they can sign Diego Sanchez and it can at least get some people who weren't going to pay attention before to pay attention now. And that's just the nature of this sport. And so it's like, we understand we can tell them, like, we think you should retire. And that does happen. I think it happens less from people like media people like us who have just been in the sport long enough that we realize like it doesn't ever do anything. If anything, it will harden the person's opposition to the idea. Like they'll just be like, all these people telling me to retire, I have to stick around to prove to them how wrong they were and that I can still do it. And it's like, you can tell an alcoholic to stop drinking. Like you can do it. People do it. It just doesn't really work until they decide that they have to stop drinking for the most part. Yeah. And that's
I've done it to you.
And you know what? Your argument was unconvincing.
Yeah, it doesn't work. I can say from experience it doesn't work.
Especially because at the time I was hammered and having a great time.
There's also like something a little bit unseemly about people who don't actually personally know the fighter telling that person to retire, even if it comes from a place of genuine concern. Like I think that the people who can legitimately tell someone to retire or that it's time to retire are probably Dana White, who has done it to Chuck Liddell, and it still didn't work even then.
Or it wasn't the telling him that got Chuck Liddell to retire.
Right. That person's like trusted training partners and coaches are probably the only people who could come to someone and say, we've seen it for a while now and it's not good. And we don't think it's time to, we don't think you should soldier on anymore. We think it's time to hang it up. But even then, like fighters, especially a fighter that has a name, like one of the main plot lines of season 1 of Kingdom, right, is that we got to get Ryan Wheeler in the gym because people know who he is. And even if it's a deal with the devil of sorts, like it's going to make money for the gym. So even not just like other fight promoters, even like in terms of training and training camps and stuff like that, there's usually a place somebody like a Diego Sanchez could go that would accept him. Right. So like it doesn't work and it feels a little bit unseemly. I mean, I guess we can say it. I guess we could all say it's time to retire, but
yeah. Well, and people like managers have talked about like just recently, Alex Davis was talking about having this conversation with Bigfoot Silva and basically being like, I don't think you should continue on in your career and I don't want to be a part of it. Like you can make him quit. You can just be like, I won't be a part of it. Coaches can do the same thing. But then it's not that hard for him to go find somebody to be like, oh yeah, what, like you need somebody to print out your contracts, say yes to whatever it says, and then fax it back after you sign it, like for 10% of your purse. I can do that, sure. Or it's the same thing with the coaching. Somebody can throw a towel over their shoulder, hold up some mitts, and be like, sure, I'm your coach. Like I know stuff about this, and on you go. And we've seen that before, where it just kind of continues on. And like you said, the Dana White, Chuck Liddell example was a good one because it was like telling him to retire wasn't enough. It was, I will pay you to retire. Like I will give you a job doing nothing where you just collect money in order to not fight. And then when that deal ended, it didn't take long before he was back in there accepting fights, which just kind of tells you like, man, here's one where Dana White was right, because if he hadn't done that, it's not hard to imagine that Chuck Liddell would have been fighting like all this time. Yeah. And probably doing some terrible things to himself. Michael Martinez points out, first to remind everybody, Chad said farting on the podcast.
Yeah.
That has 7 likes. So that
that is a thing that happened.
Cat Pope says it's definitely going into the CME soundboard. Powerhouse Papa said, gentlemen, the recent discussion for the looks good getting off the bus calendar failed to mention the unheralded, undisputed LGGOTB fighter, Chet Congo. When I was just getting into MMA and I saw him for the first time, I thought that guy has to be the champion. Boy, was I wrong. This is a good point. Chet Congo, a notable omission from our conversation about the look good getting off the bus guys.
Yeah. It reminds me of when I was working for my college newspaper covering sports. And at the time, the basketball coach at the University of Montana was this guy named Don Holst, who was an awesome guy to interview because he would say absolutely anything to you. And maybe also why he didn't last too very long as the head coach of the University of Montana basketball team.
When you say anything, like he was too honest, or he was just like saying crazy shit?
Both honest and like had no filter in terms of like, oh, this reporter is recording me right now. Maybe this is not a thing I should say, which made him great fun to cover.
Yeah.
And at the time, the Grizzlies had on their team this guy named Dominique Davis, who was like 7 feet tall and played center for them. And I asked him one time about Dominique Davis and like what he brought to the team. And Don Holst said to me, like, well, you see Dominique in warmups and you wonder, why is this guy not playing at Duke? And then you see him in the game and it starts to make a little bit more sense that he's here with us at the University of Montana.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That is maybe a little bit too honest.
I was literally like, I'm recording this, right? Like,
did you use it?
I think I did. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, how could you not?
But yeah, Czech Congo, probably the epitome of looks good getting off the bus. And then once you see him in the fight, he doesn't quite live up to the physicality that you saw earlier.
Kyle Yonner says, what y'all make of Sugar Sean O'Malley's public persona souring in the wake of his loss to Chito Vera? Mentally, he says he's still 12-0. In reality, he's 12-1. P.S. Ben, what's the latest on the rap solo project? The beats are ready, my dude. But Chad, as a fellow drummer, has final say on the production. Yeah, still getting a lot of ducks in a row with my solo rap album. The first step is learning to rap. I've been on that one for like 6 weeks now. I feel like it's going well. I feel like I'm making some progress. Also doing a lot of reading about the invention of the internal combustion engine, since that is pretty key to the whole thing.
I'm going to get a Suge Knight style executive producer credit on this album. Like, what did I do exactly? I don't know. Like, I hung around. Maybe I hung Vanilla Ice off a balcony at one point.
I sure as hell don't want you all up in the videos. I'll tell you that. Videos are my time.
Yeah.
It's my time to shine.
Remember when Suge Knight got shot and there was that picture of him on the gurney, like getting put in the ambulance, and he was like sitting up on the gurney, Undertaker style, like looking around, like the look on his face was not hurt or pained, but was just sort of like, oh, well, who do I have to kill now that I've been shot?
The Sugar Sean O'Malley thing, it does seem like as much as people loved everything about the persona and the character and all the stuff that he's doing and bringing, all the excitement he's bringing prior to the bell, there has been some ongoing backlash from the MMA community. As we talked about it before, some of the initial things he was saying about like, a few years from now, I'm going to be champion. This guy's going to be a journeyman, and how we were like, that's the stuff, like that's why you don't want to have your own podcast as an MMA fighter, or at least why you don't want to go on your own MMA podcast as an MMA fighter right after a loss, because you will end up saying some stuff like this, which if you were just saying it to the guys in the gym, they could be like, hell yeah, bro, and just agree with you, and it would be no big deal. But when you're saying it for public consumption like that, then sometimes you wander off into some territory that you would have been best left alone.
Yeah, it's a classic case of overexposure, right? I guess I'm going to compare Sean O'Malley to Joyce Carol Oates now, which is not a thing that I planned to do headed into this live chat.
JCO?
But you know how Joyce Carol Oates has been kind of a disaster, like on Twitter? She got on Twitter and then suddenly like she said a bunch of stuff that was maybe not all that flattering, and people started to realize maybe she wasn't as cool as maybe people thought that she should be. And at one point I was like, like an author like Joyce Carol Oates, and I would say, maybe an author like Stephen King, I think there's a case to be made that they should not be on social media. That one of the things they can traffic in is this sort of mystique, right? That the thing that frankly that Cormac McCarthy does, where he like doesn't do very much media, and he's not on social media, and he doesn't do interviews or things like that. So all you are left with for Cormac McCarthy is this series of insane but also kind of awesome novels, right? And you are left with this idea, like, what sort of man would write these complete batshit fucking books. And like that, he frankly leaves it up to the imagination that you dream up whoever you want Cormac McCarthy to be. And once you start seeing the like mundane minute to minute thoughts of a person like Stephen King or Joyce Carol Oates, you start to realize, oh, they're just like a super boring, and maybe in the case of Joyce Carol Oates, kind of disagreeable, unlikable person. Like I think you can make the case the same might be true for somebody like Sean O'Malley, despite the fact that they're in different walks
everything.
of
They're
life.
in different everything.
Right. But like if all you saw of Sean O'Malley was the knockouts and like the somewhat carefully crafted UFC promotional videos, we would probably be sitting here right now being like, oh, Sean O'Malley, he's awesome and he'll be back. And I'm sure he's taking this loss in stride. But instead, we're so overexposed to this person that we literally hear their moment by moment thoughts as they are in the process of working their way through the emotional fallout of this loss. And maybe it doesn't reflect all that positively. I guess instead of Joyce Carol Oates, I could have also compared him to Matt Hughes going on The Ultimate Fighter.
Yeah,
but that seems less fun. That seems like a less fun comparison.
Well, yeah, or like, I mean, Joyce Carol Oates' thing is like sometimes she'll tweet stuff and you're like, maybe Joyce Carol Oates a little out of touch with at least the tenor of the conversation going on Twitter. Stephen King's is, you know, at worst, is he just like thinks he's funnier maybe sometimes than he is, but like Stephen King I find kind of delightful on Twitter. You know, the real good example is somebody like J.K. Rowling, where you're like, what the hell do you need to be on Twitter for? Like, you're super rich already. Exactly. You were super super successful and doing so well at selling all these books until you gave people a reason to want to not buy them just because they dislike you and like the person you are actively being. Like, there's no reason for you to be on. The difference with somebody like Sean O'Malley is like, he's not an established person in his field quite as well as somebody like Joyce Carol Oates or Stephen King or J.K. Rowling. Like, he's still trying to be on the come up. So for him, being like all this media exposure is part of the thing that he's selling.
Right.
Like, I understand how it happens.
It makes the case for the traditional media machine rather than...
You know what it makes the case for? It makes the case for him utilizing the CME consulting service, where before you tweet something or talk about it on your podcast, you send it to us, Venmo us $40, and we tell you if it's a good idea or not.
Yeah, we would have probably said bad idea on that most recent podcast.
We'd have had some notes. Kevin Payne says, in the co-main event proper this week, Ben mentioned looking into some fight stats after the Zach Cummings fight, revealing that chicken nugget of intel regarding that head kick. My question, what fight statistics do you find most valuable to look into in order to get a better feeling of what happened in a fight? Meaning specifically stats within a single fight, not cumulative stats of one fighter throughout his or her career, as those sample sizes become hard to compare. Stats in MMA, I think, are tricky.
Yeah.
You know, like, it's just because they don't always mean what you think they mean or what you want them to mean. Like, they're not always as significant as, like, sometimes I think it can be useful to go back when we're talking about who deserved to win a close fight. And sometimes it's useful to look at the actual like striking stats, because you get a different sense sometimes of the fight. Like, I've been surprised numerous times where I'll come away from a fight and going back and looking at the stats afterwards, I'll be like, whoa, it seemed to me like one of these guys was way more active in round 3, and yet they landed about the same number of strikes. Like, and yet at the same time, like, one of the problems that MMA has in the stats, like I usually end up looking at UFCstats.com, which I believe used to be Fight Metric, and then like that just got kind of taken over, and now it's just like the UFC stats for each fight night, and you'll go and you'll click on any bout you want, and it'll give you like the totals or like round by round totals and everything. But the problem is, like, if you look at the difference between total strikes and significant strikes, there's usually not, like, it's hard to separate and know exactly what we mean by significant. Yeah, like, a lot of times it seems to mean anything other than a jab, and that makes it really tough to tell like exactly what we're talking like. And sometimes it's like, if a guy is laying on his back punching the guy in the ribs from closed guard, that's not really significant in terms of its impact on the fight. It almost doesn't deserve to be measured at all, and yet it'll still show up in the stats. Stuff like that makes MMA really hard to just like quantify in some way.
Is MMA one of the only sports at this point where you just kind of gotta watch it. Like,
yeah,
in the NFL, if you're like a 2,000-yard rusher and you score all these touchdowns and stuff, you can like just look at the stats and be like, oh, that guy's really good at football. He's a really good running back. But in MMA, I feel like you just kind of gotta watch it. And I think the people who are developing stats for MMA are like way smarter than I am, and they're doing the yeoman's work of like trying to quantify this really weird, diverse, nuanced sport. But I sometimes feel like we're just not quite there yet in terms of like having real, meaningful, manageable stats. And like the most meaningful and manageable are probably just what you said, like total strikes and significant strikes, even though significant strikes is kind of a subjective thing. And I know that like the fight metric people can explain it to you, like how they consider a significant strike, but it still seems to me to be somewhat subjective in like a matter of opinion, what constitutes a significant strike and what doesn't, or even what the meaning of a significant strike is. And when people start citing MMA stats, if they're trying to make an argument to you about who won a fight, a lot of times I feel like you've kind of already lost that argument.
Yeah.
That, like,
I mean,
if
in
you
context, that's usually how it goes. Yeah.
If you are the guy who's like, well, check out the significant strikes, bro. Like, look at the total number of strikes landed. Like, you are probably citing that statistic because it is not obvious that person won the fight. Like,
yes.
If it's obvious that the person won the fight, you can just say, well, fucking go watch the fight, man. Like, that person won. So I feel like that when you start dragging out significant strikes and stuff like that, you're probably making a case for a person that most people think lost that fight. And the UFC hasn't really done it any favors, right? Because like for a while they were citing all these weird statistics like takedown percentage or like takedown efficiency, and like they did. Remember when they did the thing of like the people, how far they traveled moving around the octagon and shit like that, and like you would see all those statistics, and like almost all the time, someone who had like the highest takedown defense or highest takedown efficiency rating would be somebody where you're just like, okay, like I guess that person has the top takedown efficiency of all time in the UFC, and it's someone that you would never think
three people, and none of them were really great takedown artists.
Yeah. So
yeah,
well, I think one of the things that makes, and maybe it's one of the things that makes MMA kind of like hard to get across to like a real mainstream sports people, is this lack of real manageable stats.
Well, and part of the problem with the lack of real manageable stats is just like you don't get a ton to work with. Like the sample sizes just aren't very big. Like if you have 30 pro fights in your career, that's a career. You know, careers have been made of less.
Yeah.
Like that. And you look at how many at bats you use before batting average really becomes useful. And like there's such a big difference. We just don't have as many things, like as many opportunities to measure things over and over. Like it's like, I remember trying to keep track when I first learned while playing hockey what the plus minus thing was. Like if you're on the ice when your team scores a goal, you get a plus 1, and if you're on the ice when a goal is scored against you, you get a -1. And one season, last winter, I was trying to keep track for myself, like just like writing it down after each game, just to see. But then you always feel like, well, shit. Okay, I was on the ice for that one, but that one wasn't my fault. That's this asshole over here. He gets lazy late in the games because he has no cardio and he doesn't keep on his man, and then we get scored on, and I get a minus for that. That's bullshit. But it's like, yeah, if I had 80 games to go over, like eventually it would become a pretty useful measurement to be like, is the team better or worse when I'm on the ice? But when you have like 8 games or something, maybe it doesn't work as well. And it's kind of the similar thing here. Although I don't know if I ever mentioned this before about how when I was working at the IFL once, like they were in the office one day being like, hey, we need you in this meeting later. We're beaten with CompuBox about them coming in and doing our stats. And I was like, I'd watched enough boxing and in my life at that point be like, oh shit, CompuBox, like that's legit. Like anytime you're watching boxing on like HBO or Showtime or whatever, you always get used to hearing like, oh, here's the CompuBox numbers from that last round. And so I was like, okay, this is a legit thing. And then they came in and it was basically just a guy and his son from Long Island. And like they were just like two dudes who were like, yeah, no, we're CompuBox. This is it. We do it. Like we can do it for you guys. Like you pay the fee, we'll come in, we'll do the thing. And I was just like, you know what? I kind of wish I didn't peek behind the curtain on this one. Like I kind of wish I was still walking around thinking of CompuBox as like some all-knowing AI kind of thing.
Yeah.
Instead, like I found met you guys. Yeah. Tom Hughes says, Not a question per se, more just a follow-up to Monday's episode of the proper Keep Up the Good Fight. Keep reminding fighters that the UFC has too much of the money and that Dana speaks out of both sides of his face. COVID and BLM has been mind-blowing and finding out a lot about who fighters and fans really are. Equally, watching Ricardo Lamas take his television opportunity to shout out about politics in Cuba was surprising, and ESPN/Paul Felder is brave, letting a fighter rant in a post-fight interview. Okay. I mean, I'd like to say that it's a thing where we're keeping up the good fight just because we believe so hard that we are doing any sort of good and talking about that stuff. And mainly it's just that, I don't know, if you're going to, like, I feel like we can't not talk about stuff like that. Like, as much as like sometimes when people are like sticks to sports and it's like, man, I would love to. I would love it if we just lived in that kind of environment where I could just be like, all right, we're just doing sports right now. And it never reaches out into the other parts of the world. And the other parts of the world never reach back into it. And it's totally fine. But that's just not the reality. Isaac Eldred says, like Chad, I won't be returning to my CrossFit gym anytime soon. Instead, I just placed an order for a Peloton. Since it's not going to be here for 3 weeks, I have plenty of time to build my anticipation. Tell me, how excited should I be? To which John Oakes replies, and then Chad, you can have your say on what John Oakes says. Well, Isaac, imagine hopping on your first bike. Feel the thrill of riding with your friends, hearing the giggles of joy and freedom. Now imagine doing that but alone, unmoving, no sun, no breeze, no scent to the air, just you and the whir of pedals and regret. A person much fitter and more attractive than you can ever hope to be is yelling at you, and it's expensive.
Yeah, well, that's not untrue, but like one of the like, I'll tell you what one of the things for me, and I guess CrossFit helped bridge this gap to me, but was like making peace with the exercise class. Like, previous to going to CrossFit, I had never really done a group fitness class before, mostly because I had always sort of eschewed the idea and didn't want to go like be in a group fitness class. I'd rather just like be in the weight room doing my own thing, or like being on the treadmill doing my own thing. But there is kind of something to be said for giving yourself over to that environment, even if some of it is going to be silly and some of it is going to be, there's always going to be the sort of like stock motivational talk and the all of this stuff that I guess you would expect to come along with a group fitness class. But like with Peloton, like I find it actually kind of enjoyable. Like there's a group of instructors on there. They have like a very diverse instructor base. So like if you find the person that appeals to you, you can largely take that person's classes. And like, even though some of it is obviously the silly stuff where they're telling you to, be the best person you can be or whatever, like you have to make peace with it and like enjoy the parts of it that are meaningful to you. I happen to be a pretty big Alex Toussaint guy over on the Peloton, where he's going to give me the hip hop classes and he's going to yell at me about not blocking my blessings and whatnot. So, find the thing that works for you and see how it goes for you.
See, I was going to mention, you do block your blessings too much.
That's true. I'm blocking them every single time I'm here on the air with you.
Coming up on an hour, so I had to scroll down and see what the usual Tracy Dickinson offer is, because she always gets in there late. But
it's the Tracy Dickinson. It's time right now. It's Tracy time.
Yeah. Tracy Dickinson says, could Tony Ferguson offering to help train Brock to fight John Jones be any more Tony Ferguson? The answer is no. That is the perfect thing to do. Also, Tony Ferguson offering to train anybody is like, have they seen the YouTube clips? Have they seen what he gets up to?
I can't wait to see Brock scampering across that series of tires, like juggling a medicine ball or whatever it is that Tony Ferguson is doing. But Tony Ferguson and Brock Lesnar are boys from back in the day, right? Doesn't Tony Ferguson have some history with Brock Lesnar? Like he was maybe like an early death clutch guy or something like that. I would have to look it up, but I think that they know each other. I think they're friends, kind of.
John says, is there a song that has been used for a walkout that's been effectively ruined for you? Clay Guida once walked out to Walk by Pantera, because of course he's Clay Guida, when he faced Gray Maynard in 2012. Went on to a horrifically boring 5-round split decision that I think of every time I hear that song, effectively ruining it for me.
I don't think so. Like, I guess that song, the "I'm Coming Home" song, which was like Puff Daddy or whatever it is. Like there was a hot minute where every single person in the world seemed like they were using the "I'm Coming Home" thing, which I guess now whenever I hear it, I think of it as like one of the more overutilized walkout songs of all time. But I'm not going to say that there has been a like a fighter or a single walkout that ruined that song for me.
Yeah, there's far more examples of songs where if I hear it now, I will think of, especially hearing it in the arena. There's always something different about being in the arena and hearing the walkout song, because it just doesn't always translate that well to TV. And I can remember I think it was at the fight in Portland when Big Nog fought Randy Couture in the main event. I believe it was the first UFC event in Portland, and I was covering that one. And Nogueira came out to "Give Me Shelter" by the Rolling Stones. And I was like, this is pretty awesome. Or I remember once being at a fight where Jim Miller came out to "Bad Moon Rising" by
Yeah,
CCR.
that was his thing for a while. He came out to that song quite a
He
few
switched
times.
it up a whole lot. Yeah, but like that one, I remember thinking at first, like, okay, it's kind of a strange choice for a walkout song. But then when you actually listen to the lyrics, you're like, okay, yeah, no, it is ominous and threatening. Nice choice, actually.
Yeah, there are far more songs that I feel like I've gained a new respect for, or like at least now I have a touchstone for what that song means to me that make me feel like I love this or like the song a little bit more. And I would offer up Michael Bisping's "Blur" walkout. Like previous to that, I probably
Yeah.
didn't have much time for that song, but now whenever I hear it, I think about Michael Bisping uh, not being credited for doing an early version of the Conor McGregor Billionaire Strut whenever he would come out to that song, and like it makes me feel like I like it a little bit more. "Country Boy Can Survive" by Hank
Indeed.
Williams. Like I would probably not have any kind of connection to that song at all, but the fact that Matt Hughes always walked out to it, now whenever it comes on, I'm like, oh yeah, Matt Hughes walkout song.
Sean Rogers says, can we talk about Mallory Martin's Primal Scream? It made me want to climb a mountain. Also, can one of you please contact Hannah Cyphers and offer to ghostwrite her memoir, How I Lost 4 Cage Fights During a Pandemic, the Hannah Cyphers story? I was thinking about the Hannah Cyphers situation after this whole thing, because it's like, we talked about it before, I believe, a little bit on the proper about, she lost once to Angela Hill. Like, I think she ended the year on a little bit of a winning streak, and then she's fought Angela Hill, I believe, in January, lost, but hey, that's Angela Hill. She's super good. Anybody can lose to her. And then fought all these pandemic era UFC fights. Like May lost a submission, June lost, took July off, came back in August, lost again, and lost in one where she was winning. And it made me think, I've talked to fighters before about how when they take a really short notice turnaround after winning a fight, and part of them is like, well, okay, you might be a little beat up still. You're preparing your body to peak for this point, and then they want you to turn around and fight 2 weeks later, and it seems a little bit risky. But the other part of it is that like momentum and confidence is a big thing for a fighter. And so if you're coming off a loss, you have that good feeling right after that. The good feeling is still going 2 weeks later, and you kind of feel like I can't be beat right now. Like I'm untouchable, and that really helps you going into the next fight. And I've got to think that the reverse is also true. That when you're losing, and I can understand, like we talked about it with Anthony Smith before, with Hannah Cyphers, it's the same thing. Like especially since those offers are coming in a lot more now, because the UFC is in a situation where it doesn't have access to the full roster. If you're around and available and can say yes to a fight, chances are that they are going to be offering you fights more often, just because like they need the bodies. And if you lost, you're probably telling yourself like, I need to get back in there to get this feeling, like to erase it and replace it with something else. And I know the only thing that's going to do it is either time, like a long amount of time, or to go back in there and win one. And yet once you take it and you get back in there, especially after the losses start mounting up, I'm sure there's a part of you in your brain just naturally that's saying, just don't lose.
Right.
Like whatever you do, we can't lose this next. We can't lose again. And that's going to become like a negative thing for you. It's like going up to bat in baseball and being like, don't strike out, you idiot. And like, that's not going to help you.
Right.
That is going to make it worse.
Yeah. If you miss a couple of free throws at the end of the game and cost your team the victory, chances are you're going to be thinking about that the next time you go to the line to shoot more free throws, or if you drop a big pass in a football game, or like I feel like we see this happen with golfers. If you're paying attention to that sport, that, really good golfers can just suddenly kind of get the yips or whatever. And then they have a thing in their swing that takes a long time to correct. And like, I think it was one of the things Tiger Woods even struggled with for a long time when he was kind of down and out, was that he constantly was kind of trying to retool his swing and go into these different swing coaches and stuff like that. So it's definitely like a psychological part of sports, and that's a big aspect in athletics, and people have built careers off of, you know, psychological coaching and things like that in sports. So I think that's a really big part of it.
All right, we've hit an hour here, so we're going to do a little lightning round time before we get out of here. Austin Shippey says, tweeted this to Ben, but I will have no legal means to watch Bellator after the CBS Sports move because my local providers do not offer the channel. But after looking at Viacom's properties, there really isn't a great home that would catch a casual audience in the key demo, short of putting it on MTV or the CW. Thoughts? Yeah, that's a problem. What do you tell? If you're Scotty Cokes, what do you tell Austin Shippey? Can he? It's not like he even has the access to or the ability to upgrade CBS Sports for access to your stuff. Do you just be like, I guess we'll see you around?
Yeah, I mean, it's same thing happened to the UFC when they went to ESPN Plus, though. For you know, in some cases I've heard from fans that like they can't even really watch ESPN Plus because the internet in their area is not good enough to do a lot of streaming, so they basically had to like not watch it. So I think it's definitely a problem for all organizations to some degree or another. Like probably a bigger problem, obviously, for Bellator than for the UFC. But at the same time, like, what are you going to do? Like if you're Scott Coker, you're owned by Viacom. It's not like you're going to suddenly go catch a similar ESPN deal or something like that. You kind of got to take the best platform that they have and go with it.
Alex Penny says Robbie Lawler appears to have entered fun fight territory. What are best options for fun fights for Robbie Lawler, and why is the best option clearly Nick or Nate Diaz? I mean, Nate Diaz probably isn't doing it because
that's interesting.
I mean, Nick Diaz, you got the rematch aspect there.
Yeah,
a lot of MMA fans probably don't even know those guys fought before. Back when Robbie Lawler had hair.
Yeah, I was at that fight.
Really?
Yeah.
I remember going back and watching it a couple of years ago and being amazed at how, like, Joe Rogan was like, oh, man, look, Nick Diaz is, like, talking shit to Robbie Lawler in this fight. Like, can you believe it? I can't believe it. He's talking shit to him during the fight. And it's like, oh, well, we didn't know him yet, Joe. We just didn't know what kind of guy we were dealing with Nick Diaz, but we found out. Felix says, so Jorge versus Nate too, eh? I like both guys, but didn't walk away from the first fight thinking they should run this back, despite the doctor stoppage, and I was hoping Leon versus Jorge would be booked instead. What do you guys think? Also, will Sir Nigel be gracing us with his presence again anytime soon? Thanks, boys. The talk of not only that we're going to do another fight between Jorge Masvidal and Nate Diaz, but that it's going to be for the BMF title again, which, I mean, first of all, we just saw Jorge Masvidal lose, but I guess you're going to tell us, okay, the BMF title wasn't up for grabs in that one, but now it is again. And so the BMF title goes back up for grabs, and it's the exact same fight as the first time. It just feels like, can we not have any fun stuff in this sport without just beating it into the ground?
Yeah.
Is that what we have to do?
I have zero interest in seeing that fight again, to be honest with you. I mean, I guess on fight night, it'll be fun to watch, but like, I'm not going to spend a ton of time thinking about it. And since we just said this 30 seconds ago, Robbie Lawler and Jorge Masvidal would probably be a fun fight, even though that's probably not one we will ever get to see. But if you're scrounging around for welterweight opponents for Jorge Masvidal, there's a guy. I know a guy.
Chad knows a guy. All right.
First name Rob, middle name Glenn.
Don't call him that, though. He will get mad at you.
Last name Danzig. Is that it? Are we done? We're wrapping it up? Okay.
We're wrapping it up.
All right. Well, thanks to everybody for bringing the questions, bringing the fire like you always do here on the live chat. We're going to record our Watchmen podcast right now. That'll be up later this afternoon. And be sure to check back on Friday for the Power Hour. Ben, we didn't even talk about. Well, I guess we did talk about Overeem versus Sakai this weekend on the proper. For some reason, I had already jumped ahead in my mind to Thiago Santos versus Glover Teixeira, which is the next UFC event coming up after Overeem versus Sakai.
Never forget this big one, Overeem versus Sakai.
Yeah.
Also, we'll close on this one from Derek Maldonado, who says, just want to say it's late Tuesday, and I'm sitting after a long day of grad school drinking some Proper 12. It was on sale at the grocery store. It's still pretty shitty, in my opinion.
All right. Well, we'll end on that note. We'll see you guys on Friday for the Power Hour. As for right now, we're done.